Okay. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, and welcome to the Groovy Podcast. This is episode number 46. Do you realize we're headed toward 50? I had no idea.
Yeah, we're making progress. 46.
Yeah. Well, my name is Ken Cousin. I'm podcasting from Marlborough, Connecticut, and I'm joined by the inimitable.
I'm Baruch Sadogursky, broadcasting you from Sunnyvale, California.
Oh, I put in San Jose. I got to fix that on the show notes. So you'd think
That's
I'd
okay.
know by now, you know?
It's all here. San Jose is somewhere across the street, so that's
Somewhere
fine.
in Silicon Valley, right?
Yeah, it's across. So San Jose is where there is no other city. It's San Jose.
I'm waiting for you to make a cameo on the show, you know? Silicon Valley.
Yep.
How are things out there? By the way, we haven't spoken for a while. Even when I did the last podcast, I did it with Ryan Vanderwerf. You've been traveling all over the world, right?
Yeah, we had our own user conference. Like 3 weeks ago?
Yep.
And so I was really preoccupied with that, and then I took a short vacation. So yeah, I've been out for I think month and a half or something, doing only our swamp up stuff, and it was great.
I saw a lot of tweets from that. Yeah, it was very active stuff going on there. Of course, during the time we were in our little hiatus here, they had Great Conf in Copenhagen. And
That's right.
That's the first time in a little while that neither of us were there, right?
Yep. That's we had a JFrog representative there. Michael Hutterman attended and did some talks for the DevOps track, or was it DevOps Day? I think it was DevOps Day.
Right.
So we had some representation there, but none of us were there. So yeah, that's an interesting concept that we see, right? It's both GreatConf EU and GreatConf US. They add this DevOps edition to the conference, and I think it makes a lot of sense, both because DevOps, you can edit those days to everything, right? It's like the secret sauce that always seems appropriate, but also it actually makes sense in the Groovy context, because we see more and more Groovy being involved in DevOps oriented things. And of course, stuff like Gradle and the new pipelines in Jenkins and what's not, looks like Groovy taking its spot. They're side by side with the typical DevOps languages like Ruby for Chef and Python. For Chef and Puppet, and Python for Ansible, Salt, etc. Looks like Groovy is there as well.
Well, I'm glad to see that. I don't actually know much about the DevOps side. You know, that space is. I know several people who do it. I just have never been all that good at it myself. I've always spent more time focused on the pure developer side of it. But I'm glad that I definitely agree with you that Groovy is starting to make more of an impact on that side. I've got a link that we'll get to in the show notes related to that. And yes, GreatConf both in EU and in the US is going to have a DevOps day as well. So that'll be interesting to see. I noticed they did do a Groovy Puzzlers though, right? At
Yes.
GreatConf? Who did that?
Yes.
Was it Noam?
Noam and Andres.
Mm-hmm. And there was, of course, there was a keynote by Jeff Brown, I believe, talking about Grails, and he announced some of the upcoming features. This is kind of an unusual gap that we've had, because we happen to hit an in-between time on most of the major Groovy-related frameworks. That they're all releasing milestone versions or release candidates. We just haven't quite hit a new release on Groovy or Gradle or Grails. I think Grails, I believe, released milestone. Was it 3.3 milestone release? I think came out pretty recently. So I know they're headed for the full 3.3 release. I'm not sure what the schedule is for that. Meanwhile, Groovy had a 2.5 beta come out.
Yeah, and 2.5 is supposed to be a relatively big one. It has all the macro additions, macro groovy and macro methods in it,
Will it?
and
So is that going to have the
that's
parrot parser? I thought that was being held for 3.0, but I haven't really checked recently.
I'm pretty sure the macro stuff was targeted to 2.5, and I think it was merged into the 2.5 very long ago. If nothing changed, I think it should be in there, but we can just check, I guess.
Well, if
So
that's the
I'll take a
case,
look at that.
I mean, what I'm looking forward to in the upgraded version of Groovy will be the support for the Java 8 syntax and the ability to use like, default methods and interfaces and static methods and interfaces, as well as the lambda expressions and method references. I mean, we always had a workaround for the lambdas and the method references just by using Groovy closures, but it'll be nice to do the static and default methods and the interfaces and more, of course, going on that. I've been spending my life these days swimming in Java 8 and Java 9 waters. By the way, I know it's not directly relevant to Groovy, although it will be indirectly relevant. Have you been following this whole Jigsaw scenario?
Yeah, that's interesting, and I think unprecedented, the vote that they had in GCP. I guess it's for a reason. I don't know a lot of people that actually like what Project Jigsaw brings in terms of user model, right? I know that Java core team, Oracle guys are really excited about the modularization of the JDK itself, and I think that's the good thing about it. But what we are going to get as users of Java, I think is much less exciting for the whole industry.
The side of that I've seen that affects the Groovy related stuff, or affects all of the non-JVM based languages, just to get people caught up. There are many changes proposed for Java 9 as opposed to Java 8, but most of them are minor evolutionary variations. They've added some methods to optional, they've added some methods to stream, they've added a few new date time things. There's a set of miscellaneous things that are around. They added things like private methods to interfaces. I mean, there are some changes, but of course the big newsworthy item for Java 9 is the Jigsaw implementation of JSR, 376, I think it is. It's the Java Platform Management System, which to my astonishment is abbreviated JPMS or Java PMS. I mean, didn't anybody think about this before they labeled it? I can't.
Well, apparently it makes sense, right?
Are there no women on the team at all, or the ones who are there making an ironic statement? I'm astonished. But at any rate, when JPMS was proposed, there was a vote, of course, in early May as to whether it would make it into the Java 9 release. And IBM and Red Hat came out ahead of time and stated that they were not going to support this. Now, both of them have vested interests in other technologies. Red Hat, of course, has their own Red Hat or JBoss module system, and I'm sorry, not Red Hat. IBM was supporting OSGI, of course, which they have an implementation of, and both were pointing out deficiencies. But many other groups also found things not to like. I mean, the basic idea of deep encapsulation like that is an interesting one and valid for various reasons, but you don't get any new feature without a price, and the fact that public doesn't mean public anymore if it's not exposed in a module is a problem, and the fact that reflection will no longer work unless you happen to be in the same module. I mean, these are all, big deals. Any rate, so the vote failed, and as a consequence of this and lots of emails going back and forth in the team, they eventually decided to postpone Java 9 so that instead of coming out in the late time frame in July, now it's been postponed to September 21st, I believe. But from what I understand, there's going to be another vote on the JPMS part soon, like within a week or two. And I'm not
I
sure.
believe this one. No, I believe this one will pass. As you saw, a lot of no votes that we had in the previous votes were okay. So we wanted to fail just so you, Oracle, will speak with Red Hat and IBM. Right, because there is 60%, I think, that it's needed to be passed, and a lot of other JCP members voted no to kind of make sure that it won't pass there. And their comment were now is by one Oracle to figure it out between you. So take another month and speak about it. That was kind of the majority of no votes went into this direction. We would like to see more consensus between those giants for such a major feature to be included.
We got a little bit of lag there during your comment, so I didn't catch all of that. My sense was, and again, I'm not involved. I'm just following some of the people on Twitter and on their newsletters and stuff just to see what's going on. But the sense I got was that it's very unlikely that Red Hat or IBM will change their vote, but that there have been enough changes in the rest of it that, as you say, the rest of the people who voted no may now feel they've been provided enough cover to change their vote. And
exactly.
Yeah, I'd be very surprised if some form of this wasn't included. But issues like how they're going to handle automatic modules and all that other stuff is still, I think, not quite resolved. Of course, the part that I found most interesting is not the part that got most of the press. It's, a lot of languages like Groovy and other APIs like Spring and Hibernate rely on reflection. They really need it. And if you're talking about something that's based on modules that has not necessarily exported a particular module, then you can't just automatically reflect and find out what methods and classes are available. And they decided there was a proposal to say, at first the flag was going to be called allow illegal access and defaulted to true, something like that, which is like, wow, talk about a heavily emotionally labeled, loaded name. There's a lot said in that flag. I think they're going to change the name of that flag, but the idea of having illegal reflection access available by default in Java 9 to be removed in Java 10 should have some positive reactions to the non-JVM language-based community who relies on that stuff pretty heavily. Now, there are other issues.
Yes, JVM, but not Java language community. And that's, for example, very relevant for us in Groovy, because tons of code is written to access private variables as they were public. And of course, that will break the moment you enable Jigsaw, and in previous incarnation without this flag, so by default everything will break, and Groovy is heavily invested in this private access that won't work anymore. So for us, for Groovy community, revising this default is extremely important, because it actually means that you can run Groovy on JDK 9 and it will work in the way it works today.
And I think Spring and Hibernate both take advantage of this also.
Yes,
I mean, so it's not just a Groovy thing, but it will directly impact Groovy. There's other parts that are also impacting Groovy, like the fact, I think, that you can't have the same package in more than one module. It turns out to be a complication based on the way they divided up the modules in the JDK. I mean, in your own code, you can determine things however you want, but we are all going to be impacted by the module mechanisms inside the JDK. By the way, I've been playing with IntelliJ a lot, and the latest IntelliJ version, the 2017.2 early access, now detects when you ask for a class that's not in a module that you've asked for an export for, and it will automatically generate the module info file and put the export coded and everything. Now, I know that there's already a tool for that, but it's nice to see the IDE manufacturers anticipating this and trying to to handle it. So we'll see how all that plays out. I know at Gradle they're working very hard now on trying to make everything work under Java 9, and because of course they're directly impacted by this whole organizational structure and how you handle the transitive dependencies and everything. So I know there'll be some announcements at the Gradle Summit next week on all of that.
Yeah, so we are waiting for that, of course.
So this was all a discussion that we started because of the Groovy 2.5 beta coming out and the new Parrot parser and all the Java 8 stuff. But it's nice to know they're thinking about Java 9 and issues.
No, so I don't think. I think you misheard me. Well, I spoke about macro module support, not necessarily a new Parrot parser. I don't think Parrot parser is in 2.5. Parrot parser is targeted to 3. The macro module is in 2.5, and it's actually been there from the alpha version, so it definitely will be released.
That is what you said. You're right. And I was assuming for a long time that the macro modules or the macro parser or whatever, it's something else. What's it called? The macro capability, whatever.
Yes, macro modules, and that's something else.
Yeah, I assume that was part of the Parrot parser, but you're right. It's also separate. So, yeah, that'll be interesting to see. I'm looking forward to seeing interesting applications of that to see how people are able to take advantage of that new capability. So I do expect 3.0 to be out before the end of the year. I just don't know when. I haven't looked for any time frame on that at the moment. Gradle mentioned they have a release candidate, RC3 of Gradle 4.0, and I know Gradle 4.0 will have a release very soon. If not before, then it should be out in time for the Gradle Summit, which at the time of this recording is about a week and a half away. That's next Thursday, Friday. What is it, the 22nd and 23rd, I believe, something like that, of June. Yes.
It looks like they're targeting their release to there, and that's why the release candidates are getting closer. So, and that's a very big one, right? It's a really major release.
Yeah, and the biggest difference is the enormous boost in speed. They really are going all out to make Gradle as fast or faster than Maven in any conceivable circumstance. Plus, they've been working very hard to speed up the Gradle builds for Android projects, especially large Android projects, and they've been working closely with the people at Google in order to do that. So I expect there's going to be several talks at the Gradle Summit related to that as well. Now, that doesn't affect the Groovy people directly. It's just nice to see Gradle will have this burst in performance that we expect to happen automatically. I mean, the addition of the build cache is very nice, and they even have a distributed caching mechanism for the results of individual tasks, so that you can.
Yes, and it works very nicely with Artifactory, of course. And I have to put my shameless plug right there. One of our solution engineers published a very nice blog post about how easy it is to enable a distributed cache and put it on Artifactory, and then make it available through the whole team. I will add the link to the show note.
Yeah, I don't know how I missed adding that to the show notes. So please, when you get an opportunity,
I will. Sure. Yeah, of course.
Of course, then I would be remiss, since I, in the interest of full disclosure, I'm working with Gradle these days on, especially on their getting started guides. I'd be remiss if I didn't point out that the Gradle Enterprise tool, of course, is what they're trying to market as their distributed caching mechanism as well.
Yes.
So it's like, if you want to do a build scan, anybody can do that for free. But if you want the build scans and the history and all the recommendations and everything to be in-house, that's where they're marketing their enterprise tool. But of course, there's a very friendly relationship between Gradle and Artifactory.
It is. Yep.
Always has been. Right. So at any rate, we'll have much more to say about Gradle next time. I'm hoping to do a live Groovy podcast from the Gradle Summit, see who I can round up, who's there, and we'll take care of that. You're not planning to attend, is that right?
No, unfortunately, I will be in Detroit doing a couple of meetups there in this time. But please, by all means, send my regards, of course, to all our friends there, and try to record something. Of course, a lot of usual suspects for the interviews in this podcast will be there. So please do. I know that Andrei Khovansky is coming.
Mm.
So we didn't speak with him for a while, if at all. So I think he's a very good candidate. And of course, Cedric is going to be there,
Yes.
and a bunch of other people that are very good potential interviewers for you. So please do.
Oh, definitely. It's only 2 days, so I'm going to have to grab people at the end of the first day before people start scattering. But I'll definitely see if I can do that. In fact, I'll try to arrange some of that ahead of time, see if we can actually, I know it goes against our grain, but maybe actually schedule a Groovy podcast and meet that schedule. It just seems so unlikely,
The heresy. The heresy.
Now, I mentioned
Scheduling
that,
the podcast.
now, we'll have much more to say about that then. Now, I mentioned, of course, Gradle has their release candidate and Groovy has a beta. Well, and Grails has a 3.3 milestone release as well, though I didn't add that to the show notes. But, of course, we cannot neglect Griffon. Griffon actually did release version 2.11. For those who are not familiar with Griffon or haven't had a chance to play with it, first of all, if you're in the U.S., you need to keep in mind it's spelled with the European spelling. It's Griffon. It's not spelled like Peter or Stewie, Griffon is basically your desktop Groovy solution. It is a model view controller separation as an original fork from the Grails approach, but it's completely different now. It allows you to make a desktop UI with Groovy and Groovy and Java related UI libraries, and it's very well done. Andres Almiray, I believe, is still the head of that project, and that's good to see how active they still are.
Yep. That's it still brings the same benefits until we see any other framework for desktop development for Java or JVM in general, which is not in the site. So Griffon still have this unique benefit of doing that. So yeah, absolutely, it's good to see that it's keep on kicking.
Yeah, the desktop Java community is a small but very vocal one. They don't like to be overlooked, and that's of course legitimate. Speaking of Andres Almiray, by the way, did you see that he has started a new newsletter?
Oh no, I didn't see that.
He did. He tweeted about it. I put a link in the show notes, and you can subscribe to it. His first issue of the newsletter is called, of all things, Gradle Project Properties. I have a link in there as well in the show notes to that, and it's discussing all the places where you could set properties in the Gradle.properties file and where it might go, and in build.gradle, and so on and so on. But there's a link, and you can subscribe to that, and I look forward to seeing what he ultimately does with that. We definitely don't talk about Andres enough on this podcast. He's one of the very impressive members of the community, very bright, very humble. He does a lot of presentations in many of the Groovy conferences, along with Ishel Ruiz as well. So that's nice.
Absolutely, yes.
Okay, so I mentioned that. There was, again, one more thing about Gradle, is that there was another blog post by Josh Burton called How to Speed Up Your Slow Gradle Builds. Now it's a blog post, but it's not original, as he even says. It's basically a summary of a talk that was given at Google I/O a couple of weeks ago on speeding up Android build, for Gradle. And again, all that stuff is part of the joint effort that Gradle and Google are making together to improve the performance on that side. But at any rate, if you're interested in the blog post, I made sure to put it in the show notes, as well as a link to the talk at Google I/O as well.
Yeah, and our dear friend Sergio Delamo published a blog post regarding a great configu, and his takes out of it, what he learned. He writes about this project called Ludcraft, which apparently creates tons of useful chatbots. He summarizes some talks that he heard about Gradle 3 and Codnarch, a new Gradle 3 profile in Vadin, etc., etc. So yeah, GroovyCalamari.com.
Was that in the Groovy Calamari?
Yeah, GroovyCalamari.com.
Okay, because I was looking at the latest Groovy Calamari, and he was talking about bots and static code analyzers, and I didn't look at too much detail. It must have been in a previous issue to that. But of course, we always want to recommend Sergio's Groovy Calamari as an excellent source of information. Again, if it wasn't for that one, we might not have a podcast at all, right?
That's true.
Along with Jakob Mikkelson's, Grail's Diary.
Yeah. Oh, here is something that I wanted to ask you. Looking at the show notes, how was the Google Home counterpart of the Alexa talks that Ryan did this time?
Yeah, I mean, Ryan van der Werf, again, who was on the podcast last time, gave a workshop on using not just Google Home, but everything. I think he's basically our guy who does what do you call those tools collectively? I'm not the Internet of Things, I guess, approach to.
And especially those are voice user interface gadgets, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, what the Google Home stuff is not as attractive to a regular, developer as perhaps the Amazon stuff is, because it's not really as much of an API. It's much more of a, hey, we'll let you tie into our AI approach for voice recognition and everything, but it feels much more like a scripting thing where you just declare, the terms you want it to recognize and how you want them to how you want it to recognize them and what to do in response. So he has done a lot of work with Amazon, with Amazon Lambda especially, and tying that into the Echo. But this time he gave a talk, as you mentioned, and it's in the show notes, on using Google Home as well. And I have one of those. I haven't tried to create my own app yet. I'm still searching for the right one. By the way, it occurs to me that what a very, because voice interfaces are not that easy to navigate. It occurs to me that what might be a nice little app, and there's probably a dozen of them already now that I say it, would be, remember those old text-based adventure games like Zork or Adventure, whatever?
Yes.
Wouldn't that be natural, for
I think there are a couple of them already in Alexa. I know that my kids are playing. And one of them is called, if I remember correctly, Magical Door, I think. And there are a bunch of others. And they are text adventures with the voice user interface. It's lovely. It's just great.
Well, at any rate, Ryan did a talk about that at GrayConf, and he also posted his slides. But in addition to that, he also, of course, being active as part of OCI now, posted a new Grails guide, so that you could use what he called a Google Home guide, and I've got it in the show notes, but it's using a Grails backend for the functionality. And he explains how to deploy all this stuff on the Google Cloud and how to have the Google Home app access all of that and all the hoops you have to go through to get that to work. So I believe that if I ever do get an idea or even just a hankering to do a Hello World version of some app on there, that I definitely will follow that guide. Sergio, of course, I think it's Sergio. He's also the one who's very active with producing the Grails guides, right?
Yes.
And I haven't listed all the new ones that are in there, this since our last podcast. But if you just go to guides.grails.org, there's becoming quite an extensive set of guides available there. We are at Gradle, we're trying to imitate a lot of that. I mean, we're building our own guides.gradle.org, and we're just finishing the revision of the new UI. But again, I didn't mean to distract from the value that is being provided by guides.grails.org. Sergio is putting out roughly one new one a week, and sometimes even more than one, especially if, as we say, like Ryan is able to put out one in addition.
No, that they do a great job with those guides, and I think this format is they found the right format, right? It's relatively lightweight. The users don't need to plan like a whole lot of time to invest in those, and they provide immediate value. So yeah, they are lovely.
I'm going to be interested in seeing how they scale it. We're going to imitate one thing that they did, which is that they've managed to attach labels to the guides, and there's a little search box at the top that allows you to filter by label. So I think that's going to be one way to help these things scale. We're going to have to see how that works out in the long run as we get more and more. But it's got to be helpful to give basically getting started mechanisms for these technologies to new people. So at any rate, I haven't seen all the details of the presentation yet. It's on my list of things to watch, but I did breeze through the guide itself, and it looked very valuable. And again, if I do get a hankering to write one of these things, that's definitely the way I would recommend going. Now, speaking of GreatConf, pardon me?
Yeah, no, I think that's a good idea.
Okay, now speaking of GreatConf, because again, Ryan gave his talks there, some of the slides and eventually the videos from GreatConf in the EU have started to make their way online. I put a couple links in there, like for example, speaking of desktop Groovy, you know, Sasha Klein, Alexander Klein, has put up his Groovy FX slides, which I believe is a Groovy DSL on top of Java FX as well. And again, that's for the desktop crowd. I have not done much with Java FX, but I know people who have. And in general, the sense I get from people is that they really like it, is that it's certainly a major improvement over the old Swing, you know, UI classes and everything. So at any rate, put the link in the show notes. So, and anything by Sasha Klein is very good. So
yeah.
Definitely.
So I think Canoe doing a lot of stuff, obviously with JavaFX and in all flavors, including Groovy. So yeah, so I think that might be an interesting talk to watch. Absolutely.
It's a specialty topic, but it's one of the really interesting ones, and it's very useful if you have that problem to solve. You know, speaking of GreatConf. One of the also nice things is that Danny Hyun has a tendency not just to put his slides online, but to actually write up an ASCII doc, you know, and generate full HTML materials for workshops he does. And he put a nice set of materials up for his Mastering Async in Ratpack talk. I am starting to see places using Ratpack more and more. I am starting to see that actually get into the mainstream. I think there was a thread on Twitter recently about how Target is using Ratpack internally for several different applications. But at any rate, getting back to that, Danny put his slides online, and it's definitely worth taking a look at, not just the slides, but the full materials in there. And if you go along with that, you combine that with, I suppose, the Learning Ratpack book by, wait a minute, who wrote that Learning Ratpack book? I forget. Exactly.
I don't know. I think it just appeared out of the blue. I don't believe someone actually put any effort in it.
Yeah, some guy I think you're supposed to unfollow. That's about all I remember about it.
Yeah, no, I don't think. I think it's fake news. I don't think he actually did something.
Well, between that book and the Danny's materials, I think you'd have a good sense of how to work with Ratpack. And one of its best features, of course, is how elegantly it handles asynchronicity and coordination of things that are supposed to be happening at different times, and how it separates a thread pool for the things that must happen synchronously from a thread pool from the things that are happening asynchronously. It's really an elegant solution. When combined with Netty, they get enormously great throughput on that.
Yeah, and I think that Danny did hear some comparisons with Rails scalability, and that's pretty funny comparison to watch when people were proud of back in 2015, not that long ago, at 2,000 requests per second for 30 on 30 app servers that run as a cluster, and then he provides his comparison of a completely different scale running on a Ratpack, actually doing much better job. So yeah, that's even if you don't plan to do the whole tutorial and the whole workshop, it's still a very nice read by itself. Just seeing the material out there. Danny is Danny is amazing. He does a great job, and I think kudos go to ASCII Doc as well and ASCII Doctor, because putting those notes can be a lot of effort, and making it easy, and making stuff like code, publishing code with the formatting and referencing to the code in the notes very easy. It's something that makes those kind of tutorials more easy to create, and then of course we all benefit from it. So yeah.
Yeah, and of course, Rat Pack is always focused on performance. I think it was, Dan Woods, that guy, over a year ago.
That guy.
Yeah, him. I think it was over a year ago. He was doing demos where he was able to demonstrate, was it nearly 1 million requests a second or something something absurd like that. And now it was a somewhat contrived problem, but just the fact you're able to achieve that was rather remarkable. Of course, I have to mention Dan because he got a mention in the preface of the new Spock Up and Running book, which is now actually in print by Rob Fletcher. In the preface, at the end of his discussion about how, it's Spock and all the features and everything, he did remind everyone that they're supposed to unfollow Dan Veloper right there in the preface. Nicely done for Rob Fletcher.
Yep, of course. Well,
yeah,
there are things that you must do.
Yeah, we've been mentioning that book for a couple of podcasts now because it's been in various stages of production, but now it's actually out in print. So if you wanted your copy or your signed copy or whatever, they are now available. So that's nice to see. By the way,
I hope Rob will be at Great Conf US and will bring some books with him so we can grab a copy and get it signed.
Yeah, I hope
his
so.
Plans are. We can check the agenda and see if it's there.
Oh yeah, easy enough to check because they have all the talks and the speakers and everything available on that now. He's not listed as a speaker, but he may be there anyway. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing, let's see, what else do we have here? Speaking of back to the Great Conf idea, we also have some slides that were updated by Paul King. Anything by Paul King is good. And he has updated his presentation, which has the great title, Groovy, the Awesome Parts. So that's always a very popular talk when he gives that one. And he's updated his slides for that. So I put a link to the show notes in that as well. And I know there'll be many, many more talks and eventually videos coming out of that, but that's all the stuff I added from GreatConf directly. It seemed to me, based on what was coming out of it, that it was a very successful conference. People really did enjoy it. And I'm sure the US one will be very popular as well.
And from there, we will both be here, and we will both podcast from there and interview people and have a lot of fun.
I'm actually not scheduled.
No? Oh my God! No, you have to come.
It's my own
It's in the area.
Yeah, it was my own fault. I thought I had a conflict and didn't submit something, and then when the deadline went by and it turned out I didn't have a conflict or not much of one, I sent a message directly to who I thought was one of the organizers and said, "Hey, I'm willing to do this, this, and this," and never heard back. And I don't think they're actually an organizer. So in other words, I've really dropped the ball on that. But I'll see if there's some way I can somehow swing coming by anyway.
Yeah, you should just come, of course. I think.
Yeah, well. Yep. We'll have to see how that goes. But at any rate, you may have to carry the ball yourself on that one, and grab somebody there to do the podcast with you. Now, a couple last items. There was a nice little framework announced, an interesting little one called Jexler. Did you hear about this?
Yeah, I heard something, but unfortunately I didn't look into it.
Yeah, the only disappointing thing about it is they spelled it with a J rather than a G. It would have been amusing to spell it Jexler with a G and then argue endlessly about the correct pronunciation. But it even looks like it has a vaguely Batman-shaped logo, so that's all good. By the way, I don't know if you noticed, I have my henchman shirt on.
Oh, that's very nice.
Yeah, well, this is partly in honor of Adam West and
yeah, of course.
It's too bad. But at any rate, Jexler, as they say, is a simple as he says on the website, relaxed Groovy framework for starting and stopping Groovy scripts as services and enabling them to react to events of their choice. Great for prototyping and useful for automating. They have a shell tool and a web GUI if you want it, and how to handle HTTP requests and various use cases and everything on the website. So again, by the way, you could tell that it clearly was written in ASCII Doctor.
Yeah, of course.
I definitely look forward to breezing through that. It has the nice feature of looking to be very simple and easy to get up to speed on, and I think it ties in nicely with the discussion lately about, as you say, DevOps. Because
exactly. Yes, no, absolutely. One of the downsides of Groovy comparing to other languages for DevOps was the lack of this kind of integration into an operating system. Stuff like the services, etc. So it's good to see, and it's definitely a step in the right direction. And it looks very, as you mentioned, very, very nice and cute, and hopefully does the job. So yeah, definitely should use it, and you should check it out, if only for the logo.
If only for the logo, right?
Yeah, the logo is something else.
Now, also Andrew writes, I think it's Reitz, isn't it? I know he told me, and I feel bad I forgot. Reitz. I think if it's German, it's pronounced Reitz, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, any rate, Andrew Reitz has been busy with the Groovy plugin for Android. He's released another version of that, and along with that, like a day or two later, released the Spock Android library for running Spock tests on Android as well. I will be at the Gradle Summit. I do intend to corner one of the Google people there. I'll see if I can grab one of them and say, look, now that you've recognized Kotlin as a first-level language on Android, why not Groovy? I mean, what's wrong with supporting it? Because last year, when I grabbed one of those guys and asked that exact same question, the attitude was, well, we're going to be technology agnostic. We'll just stick with the JVM and see how that goes. And now, of course, everything seems to have changed. So I'll try to see if I can get an answer to that question. I'm not optimistic. There's also rumors around that eventually Android's going to ditch the JVM and go to languages like Go and Rust and everything. They have their own virtual machine, and who knows? Nothing was announced related to that at Google I/O, so we have at least another year.
Yeah, so I think one of the reasons things changed was because of all this Oracle suit going on, and I think they proactively try to keep away from Java as much as possible. So Kotlin is the easy way out of all Android is Java thing, and also from what I heard from the proponents of Kotlin on Android, it actually was designed with this use case in mind, as opposite to Groovy. So the footprint is much smaller, the performance is much better on Android, and that's why when people choose what to use on Android, if not Java, they prefer Kotlin over Groovy. I, of course, personally think that it's heresy, but this is what they say.
Well, it's true that Groovy, of course, is much older than that and has a much more general profile. I think a lot of the move to Kotlin was also because of Java 8 not being supported on Android until very, very recently. And people were looking for all the advantages that Groovy brings them. I mean, there was a blog post not long ago by Steve Yagi talking about how wonderful Kotlin is, and it was all about exposure to Android again and how he didn't like Android, but now he's going to give it another try, and he fell in love with Kotlin. And when he listed all his reasons, again, 80% of them were things we've been doing in Groovy for 10 years.
Exactly.
I, in fact, was in the process of preparing a long, detailed response to that in a blog post, and I'm still sitting on that at the moment, mostly because I'm a coward. I don't really want to generate too much controversy in the industry. I don't want to be too critical. But we'll see. Eventually maybe I will release that just to say something
Well,
like, look, if you like Kotlin, you'll love Groovy.
exactly,
That's
exactly. You can take it in very positive way and just saying exactly that. If you like Kotlin, you'd love Groovy because it has all that plus additional features that we all know and love that do not exist in Kotlin.
And of course, Andrew writes and working on the Groovy plugin is always careful to use compile static wherever possible so that they can get the better performance there as well. But of course, the build size is not going to be as small as it will be under Kotlin. And of course, you got JetBrains pushing Kotlin very hard. And that's fine. It's just that I'm still hoping that Groovy will eventually be accepted as a reasonable alternative there. It's just hard to make much progress when you basically have one guy working on the plugin in his spare time. We'll see how that goes. Again, I'll see if I can learn something at the Gradle Summit from the Google people to see if I can get any reaction on that at all. I also, the last thing I put in the show notes, I know we mentioned it last time, but I just want to mention it again. I really like that Good Times library that was added to add a lot of groovy, nice usability features to the Java 8 date time library. Because in the Groovy JDK, we have all these additions to date and calendar, but they haven't done much with local date, local time, zone date time, all these different things. And the Good Times library has gone to great lengths to take care of all those issues. I'm really just looking for an excuse to use it. I really like the for that.
Okay.
I have to do a couple of minor things on the self-promotion side, the shameless self-promotion, I suppose we call it. One thing,
by all means.
Oh, well, okay, and I'll try not to overdo it. One thing is that my Grails 3 videos are now available at Safari. I have 4 different videos out there. These are at shop.o'reilly.com, but of course they prefer it if you have a Safari subscription, they're available immediately. So I've got a bunch of extensive stuff out there, and hopefully they will garner some interest. Well, I'll let you know, to see how that happens, but at least they're available. I know OCI is creating virtual training classes around Grails 3 as well. Jeff Brown's doing some of those, so that keep an eye out on the OCI Twitter feed and on Jeff Brown's feed for the details on those. The other thing I have to mention on my own side is I guess I mentioned to you, I should say, for those of you who are watching on the YouTube side, I'm getting rather fuzzy here, and it's not just because that I want to be more and more like Baruch, as we go.
Which is the actual reason, of course, we all know.
Yeah, but I can't be that obvious. That's a little creepy if you go that direction. So it just has to be subtle. Just how married couples start to look like each other over time, or that sort of thing. Well, that's again, I don't want to get too creepy, but we're headed that way. Actually, a lot of the reason for the beard is that a couple of weeks ago I told my wife I was not going to shave again until I released a draft of my book, until the whole book, my book called Modern Java Recipes, that features all the recipes for the new features in Java 8 and 9 to some degree as well, is completed, and I'm in the home stages. I mean, it should be completely submitted and everything within a week, or I don't want to say or die trying, but it's going to be tough, So
yeah, so we'll see you with the ZZ Top kind of beard very soon, I guess.
That's right. So by the Gradle Summit, it's either going to be in or I'm going to be in big trouble. We'll see how that goes. And yeah, I'll be headed toward the ZZ Top approach, definitely. So I wanted to mention those things. Is there anything else you wanted to bring up? Anything you're doing or anywhere you're going?
So groovy perspective, GreatConf US is approaching fast, and I'm very excited about that. And as I mentioned, the DevOps edition makes not only me happy, but also JFrog happy in general, because this is our bread and butter, and seeing that the community that we really love and conference, which is our kind of one of our home conferences, getting into more and more into the domain that we really care about, actually make us all very happy. And this time going to GreatConf will be even more rewarding for me. So I'm very excited about that.
I do still believe it is my favorite conference of all of them to go to. I always have a wonderful time there. It's a great community, and No pun intended, actually. But I mean, it really is. They're a very friendly and helpful bunch of people, and I welcome as many people there as possible. And it's also the home base for the Great Ladies organization too. So hopefully there'll be people from representing that area also as well. So that's all in Minneapolis. That's July 26th through 28th.
I hope we will not. I hope, I'm sure we will speak by then, and you will report back from the Gradle Summit. That
Right.
I look forward to hear your summary of that. So good luck with the book. Enjoy the conference, and we'll speak soon.
Oh, well, thank you. You have a good time as well, and I will talk to you as soon as possible. Take care.
Bye bye.